Ryu let go of Mouth. He felt ripped apart inside. Surely this was a trick. If he followed the path, he would be ambushed. He would be distracted from finding the Jacquio. If he gave in to his emotions, he'd be sacrificing the world to a madman the likes of which it had never seen. His father was dead. Impossible as it seemed, he had to face it. He retrieved his sword. Then he took a deep breath. Above him, the sky was beginning to darken. Just above the horizon, the evening's first star peeked at him, sending a shaft of light so strong that Ryu had to blink. It must have been a trick of the jungle air. He had never seen a color so rich and bright. Suddenly, the words of a poem spilled into his thoughts. And when you're lost, my son, when joy becomes despair, I'll send a star of deepest gold to let you know I'm there. It was his father's poem, the one he had written in the letter. Ryu felt a knot in his stomach. His eyes began to well. Stop, he told himself. This was not a time to succumb to emotion. It was just a coincidence. Still, what would be the harm of following Mouth's instructions? Ryu knew he could survive whatever was thrown his way. He jumped into the tunnel. The path was exactly as Mouth had told him, except for one thing. There was a guard at the end of the black stone pathway. A guard that walked on 4 legs and had fangs and growled with an unearthly sound. Ryu kept his distance at first. He couldn't tell if the creature saw him. Its eyes were completely white. As it paced back and forth, Ryu studied its horribly deformed shape. Although its head was a cross between a wolf and a panther, its body was hunched in a permanent crouch like a frog. Its thigh muscles were the width of tree trunks, and it barely moved its legs when it walks. Ryu edged closer. He unsheathed his dragon sword. The creature turned to face him. The whites of his eyes shone like beacons. Who dares challenge Kerberos? Ryu hadn't expected it to talk. He hesitated before speaking, having never addressed an animal before. I mean to step by, Kerberos. You and what army? Kerberos replied. Its upper lip curled backward into a snarl, revealing the full length of its top teeth. A greenish venom dripped from the corners of its mouth. The liquid hissed when it hit the floor, leaving white marks on the stone. Acid, Ryu realized. Kerberos, I don't wish you harm. I mean to enter the room beyond you. Kerberos opened his mouth as if to answer. Instead, a stream of acid flew toward Ryu. Ryu ducked. There was a brief tss as a drop of the liquid touched a few strands of his hair, burning them away. He crouched low to the ground. Kerberos eyed him warily. It would be risky to use the dragon sword. If Ryu got close enough to strike, Kerberos would fry him with acid. Chi power was out, because there were no eyeballs for Ryu to look into. Ryu was angry. Angry that this poison-drooling monster might be the only thing standing between him and his father. If his father was alive! He was angry that his father might not be alive, that this all might be a trick. His rage was enough to activate the art of the fire wheel, but he knew he wasn't close enough. But there was another aspect to the art of the fire wheel, one he had almost forgotten. It was a dangerous, harmful technique that could backfire. Akira had warned Ryu against using it until he was a little bit older. Tsh! A wisp of smoke drifted past his nostrils. Another stream of acid had missed him by a millimeter. Suddenly, Ryu felt as if he had aged 10 years. If you can hear what I'm thinking, Akira, he thought, Give me your blessing. Ryu let his fury grow. He rolled away as more acid shot toward him. He stood up, thinking about his father, thinking about the condition he might be in if he was still alive, thinking about the nightmare he had gone through to get this far. The smoke formed around him. It turned to flame. Kerberos cocked its head, looking for a moment like an innocent, curious dog. Then it began rolling back its upper lip again. Ryu rotated his right arm. Small spots of fire followed the path of his hand. They gathered into balls, 3 of them. The balls grew bigger, brighter, more solid. With a powerful heave, Ryu flung the fireballs. The whites of Kerberos's eyes seemed to grow whiter. Its tight, snarling lips fell limp. As the creature disappeared in a burst of light, Ryu thought he heard a final defenseless whimper. The hall was clear now. The flames around Ryu flickered out. But this time, he didn't feel weak. This time, he had a clear pathway to the door toward which Mouth had directed him. It was made of solid steel plates, riveted tightly into a massive structure that stretched upward at least 20 feet. It had been made so that nothing could break in. Or could it have been made so that nothing could break out? Ryu knew one of 2 things was in there. A reunion with his father, or certain death. Without a shred of fear, he walked toward the door. With a thrust of the dragon sword, he broke the lock. Taking a deep breath, he opened it. It was black inside, but that wasn't what made fear pour through Ryu's body. Deep, snarling breaths echoed off the walls. First, they seemed to come from the left, then the right. Then there was the smell. Ryu had never experienced anything like it. It reminded him of decay, of rotting meat. He became aware of smoke circling around him, embracing him like ghostly fingers. It was warm, moist, and musty, and it seemed to coat his skin with a film of slime. But it was the breaths that frightened Ryu the most. They seemed to whisper death. They rattled and wheezed like the last gasps of a doomed person. If Ryu's father was in here, maybe Ryu didn't want to see him. Who is here? Ryu called out. He tried to keep his voice firm, but it came out thin and shaky. Whatever was in the room belched another cloud of smoke. Ryu staggered back, coughing. What? Is this the brave boy who stood before the great Jacquio so defiantly only moments ago? Came the Jacquio's voice. It sounded electronically amplified. Ryu guessed it was coming out of speakers. You seem a different person. Could this be fear I detect? Where's my father, Jacquio? Ryu shouted. Not so fast, my impetuous prisoner, the Jacquio laughed. I have much to tell you before you die. Much that concerns you. Perhaps you are not aware what I have been doing all these years shut up in this temple. Only developing the world's most spectacular advances in mind and body control. I couldn't care less, Jacquio, Ryu retorted. Just tell me about my father. Your father, the Jacquio snapped, was one of my greatest successes. Mouth was right. Dr. Hayabusa is not dead. He has been transformed. We fondly call him the Masked Devil. He is now a killing machine like no other. Horror washed over Ryu like a bath of liquid ice. What are you talking about, you demented creep? The hot breath in the room suddenly became a gust of fire and grit. Ryu backed away, covering his eyes. Ryu Hayabusa, you're about to meet your match. And guess what? The Jacquio's deep laughter rumbled through the room. He's your own flesh and blood! Ryu stood erect in the darkness. He looked toward the source of the heavy breathing. He strained his eyes, trying to see something, anything, in the suffocating darkness. A word fought its way up from the bottom of his being. It was a name he had never addressed anyone with, never dreamed that he would. Now he would say it for the first time in his life, and it felt wonderful and terrifying at the same time. Dad? With a sudden blinding harshness, the room was bathed in bright light. Extending from the floor to the ceiling was a horrible mask. It was molded to look like putrid flesh, bubbling over itself, dripping onto the floor. Its eyes were hollow sockets, its nose gnarled and broken. Its mouth was retracted into a grotesque grin, rimmed with knife-like teeth. Fire whiplashed out of the mouth of the masked devil. Ryu backed away, his skin singed with flame, and as the mask rushed toward him, flaring its teeth, he heard the Jaquio's voice screaming with sinister glee. Happy reunion, father and son!